I'll begin with asking you about the G20 having this 20 largest economies, and so will the New Delhi meeting reposition finance infrastructure frameworks to stimulate global growth, or like in the past, is it going to be for the growth of just a few?
Well, first of all, Smita, good to talk to you. And as you can see, this is like the home stretch. Everything is getting ready. The negotiators are negotiating. The people who are trying to get the arrangements done are working at it. So it's really at this moment very, very focused time for us. But still, I think it's important people have a sense of what is going on. My reading right now of the G20 is that there are a whole lot of issues. Some are longer term structural, meaning that they have been discussed before, including at earlier G20s. Some are more emergent. They are issues of the last year, maybe last 2-3 years, which have again come to head, whose stress impact on countries is very high. So you're going to get really a mix of issues that the world is looking at, and a lot of this the burden is on the global south, on developing countries. One very important message for us is focus on the global south. But there is a larger context. The context is of a very turbulent global environment. The impact of the COVID, impact of the Ukraine conflict, issues like debt which have carried on for some time. And by the way, climate disruptions which are today affecting the economy as well.
I'll come to Global South because you spoke about that post BRICS also.
Sure.
I'll come on that, but first I'd like to ask about whether the fact that President Putin and President Xi are not going to be present at the New Delhi meet, has that cast a shadow on the summit?
Not really. I mean, look, I think at different points of time in G20, there have been some presidents or prime ministers who, for whatever reason, have chosen not to come themselves. But that country and that country's position is obviously reflected by whoever is the representative on that occasion. So you had some occasions where you had a president or two, sometimes three, who have not themselves come. But I do think my sense from talking to the ministers certainly, and I know the Sherpas are in touch with each other. They are right now trying to hammer out the final document. I think everybody is coming with a great deal of seriousness. I mean,
will it have an impact on the outcome of the meet?
I would put it this way, that the issues are there. These are not issues that are this morning being taken up. I mean, there's a whole gestation period of 8-9 months where at different levels ministers or officials have tried to progress an issue. So this is like a culmination. These are really about 16-18 processes which are all coming together to be stitched up together to produce a summit.
So outcome. Russia and China are not really miffed with India, and is that the reason?
No. I don't think it has anything to do with India. I mean, I think whatever decision they make, I mean, they would know best, but I would not at all see it the way you would suggest.
And it's not going to have an impact on the declaration itself is a complicated procedure to arrive at a consensus to have a declaration. So are we moving towards it? Are the countries moving towards that?
Well, we are negotiating right now. As I said, the negotiation is not the clock did not start ticking yesterday. The clock has been ticking for some time. So typically what happens is there's a ministerial meeting. Then the ministerial meeting produces outcomes. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
I chaired the development ministers meeting. Okay. So when we did the development ministers meeting, there was and agreed, all 20 countries agreed that there should be an action plan to speed up the Sustainable Development Goals achievement. All 20 countries agreed that we should have high principles for environmentally friendly lifestyle. So now, if these have been already approved, either they get attached or some part of it in some summary form comes into the document. So everyone, the labor, the education, the finance is a very, very important track.
Correct.
That's a very crucial track, because in a way that's where the whole thing began, the G20 exercise began. So every track feeds in outcomes. These are, some of them have multiple meetings like finance, some of them have a single meeting. So these outcomes are melded together and they produce a composite document. In addition, there are things which may be discussed among the Sherpas, or the leaders may also discuss some things among themselves.
These meetings have been going on since the beginning of this year.
Right.
But is there a consensus building, and what will India see as the host? What will India see as a win-win situation?
Well, I don't think it's just a matter of India seeing something. Today, the expectations of the world are very high in terms of what the G20 is able to produce, and produce in terms of meeting the challenges of the world. So, if you were to go to Africa, we go to Latin America, go to parts of Asia, go to the Caribbean, go to the Pacific, everybody is today saying, okay, I have a certain set of issues. I have a debt problem, I have a trade problem, I have a health access problem, I have a green development resourcing problem. So, what will the G20 do for me? So, the world is waiting. So, the world is waiting, or today I see it more for India as a responsibility, that we have the responsibility today in a very difficult world. It is difficult in terms of the COVID impact, difficult in terms of the conflict impact, in terms of the climate impact, in terms of debt. That's one part of it. But it's also difficult politically. There is a very sharp north-south divide. There's an even sharper east-west polarization. So how do you bring people together? How do you find common ground? How do you make everybody understand that we all have a bigger responsibility? And therefore, please, can we kind of get our act together here and do what is right by the world?
As a former diplomat and now as an external affairs minister, I guess that's right up your alley to find common ground.
Well, everybody is worked and is working on it. There's a every minister, we have about 15 ministerial tracks. Every minister has put in their best. The Sherpa and his team have worked and are working very hard. So it's a collective effort. Sure.
Right. You've just come back from BRICS. Yeah. You're heading for the ASEAN Summit, East Asia
this
Summit.
Evening.
Yeah. So that's the East Asia Summit, and then is the G20. It's a packed schedule. You spoke about global South. You spoke about the divide between the East and West, between the North and South, and trying to find common ground. Do these countries see India as a voice? You said represent the global South. Do these countries who are participating in these fora, do they see India as a credible voice within the fora?
The global South countries? Yes. I would certainly hope so, for this reason. There have been G20 summits before. No other G20 presidency made an effort to get together the developing countries who are not on the table and say, please come sit with us, tell us what are your concerns, and we will distill those concerns and place it before the G20. That's a very unique exercise. Nobody has done it before. So if we have taken the trouble, and we meaning here Prime Minister Modi himself, if 125 countries have been consulted, feel today, yes, what we told India has promised us that they will put that issue on the table. I think they have a lot of expectation of India. And as far as the rest of the G20 is concerned, they know that, look, we have always in G20, outside the G20, India has a reputation of being a very constructive player, someone who bridges divides, who kind of somewhere helps to fix problems. So So, there's a lot of goodwill that we have, and again I stress to you, I am confident that every one of the G20 coming to Delhi will understand the responsibility that they bear, will understand today that the other 180 countries of the world are looking to them to set directions, and that they cannot afford to fail them.
Do these countries at any point of time feel that India has shifted its position, is leaning more towards the US than it used to? I know I sound like a dinosaur, but let me hark back on the non-aligned movement period when we were considered absolutely, not leaning, and if at all leaning, then more towards the Soviet bloc, the former Soviet bloc. Do they see us leaning more towards the US now?
No, I hate to confirm to you that you are being old-fashioned here. That it's really, I think, a very anachronistic way of looking at the world today. I think a lot of countries identify with India as a developing country. A lot of countries identify with India as a democracy. Many identify with India saying, okay, it's a pluralistic country, we see many institutional, cultural similarities. So, different people in the world identify with us, but do understand this point. G20 is not the arena for power politics. I accept, I am very, very conscious that diplomacy and international relations is a very competitive exercise. But even in diplomacy, there are occasions when you are competitive, there are occasions when you are cooperative. G20 is very much a collaborative forum. It is even countries who differ profoundly on many other issues, but their history, if you look at it in G20, is to find something which brings them together. So, we are trying to develop an agenda that if you look at resources for green development, for example, if you look at dealing with sustainable growth, if you are looking at plastics, if you are looking at biofuels, if you are looking at educational access, at nutrition, these should not be, and I do not think these are political issues. So, what India's strategic calculations and adjustments may be, I think, is a different subject.
But I've covered G20s earlier, and whenever there's a summit meeting, the presence of the American president kind of overshadows the other heads of state, and it can be something very small like the cavalcade going, and then everybody is made to wait for the US president to go forward. So, do you think that the fact that President Biden is going to be here for 3 days in India, is that going to impact on the other countries feeling that India as a host country is again paying too much attention?
No, I just think you're going on a wrong track here. I think you will see that everybody will come in smoothly, nobody will have to wait for anybody else. For us the G20 is a collective exercise, we will deal with it in that collective side.
It's not just the bandobast I'm talking about.
We are India, we are India, we know how to handle the world.
Right.
And believe me, especially in the last 10 years, we have shown how we can handle the world.
I will also ask you whether, we were talking about the declaration, and the Russian foreign minister was pretty belligerent, saying that they wanted their view on the Ukraine crisis to be included in the declaration. Don't you see that muscle flexing has begun even before the summit?
That may be the way you would characterize it. I mean, for me, anybody would try to put across their national position, try to maximize their negotiating position, if you would. I think you should wait and see what actually happens in the negotiation, not prejudge it purely in terms of what may be said on one occasion and what may be the media interpretation of what was said on one occasion.
President Biden's visit, on the bilateral level, what is going to be on the table, if you could tell us, because there's talk about nuclear reactors, visa issues coming up. What could be on the agenda?
Well, we've had a very strong state visit by the Prime Minister to the United States, strong in terms of the outcomes and the results of that visit. So, my understanding is right now both systems, the Indian system and the American system, is busy working that through and trying to implement a lot of what was agreed to in June this year. So I think this would give an occasion for the leaders to take stock.
Post-COVID and post-Ukraine conflict, foreign policy analysts feel that there's this arc of cooperation and arc of alliance between Russia and China, and that influences most forums. Whether it was at the BRICS, you heard about de-dollarization and stuff like that coming out. And do you think that that will cast a shadow on all these international meets?
No, I think often arguments can be overstated, sometimes deliberately so, for a purpose. Okay. Since you refer to BRICS, let me give you the example of BRICS. We had the 5 BRICS members, a perfectly congenial, obviously a very detailed exchange about what, how to take BRICS forward, of which membership expansion was one. And even when you speak about currency, frankly, a lot of the focus was really about how to use our national currencies, which many of us want to do and are capable of doing today. We may not have been in that situation, a decade ago. So I would say, do not see the world very starkly in terms of black and white and this camp and that camp. I'm not saying that countries don't have their partialities and their relationships. They do. But I think the world is a much more nuanced place. It's much more multipolar. There are many more variables. A large part, even say again in BRICS, would have been, what are the views of South Africa? What does Brazil think? How, where is India going? And then you find some kind of landing point. I mean, if you look even at last year's BRICS, I mean, there were a whole lot of countries. You can broadly call them countries in the middle, and Indonesia and India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, who all had their views and did what they could really to arrive at a consensus. And I think
to what do you attribute this this change? Where you saying that there is multipolarity and they're finding a voice to speak in spite, and it's not stark like what you're saying.
Because I think over the last many years, especially maybe over the last decade, perhaps a little bit more, the relative economic weight of countries have changed. The relative political confidence of countries have changed. The relationships, especially of the major powers and the middle powers, has changed. So if you looked at it earlier on, it was like very tight groupings and, let us say, particularly in the Western world, a very strong alliance structure. Today, I think the world architecture has opened out very much more. So you have many more independent countries. They could be independent at a global level or a regional level or even in the neighborhood level. I think the world is changing, and the G20 itself is actually the best statement of it. That there was a time, after all, we left everything to the G7. Today, the fact that you have G20, I mean, G20 is today seen as the premier global forum. After all, just think in the last year, compare the G20 meeting to anything else, which has happened. A NATO meeting, I don't know, a SCO meeting, a BRICS meeting, a Quad meeting, a UN meeting. Nothing has evoked the kind of attention and focus that a G20 meeting has, because the world recognizes today that this gathering has a very exceptional importance.